Okay, we're streaming. All right. Welcome back. We're finishing Micah today, and I'm excited because the longer that these studies go on, the more I want to get into another book. Which means that the next book we have to cover is like Zechariah, which is like 14 chapters. So that one's gonna be rough. Because you end up reading the whole book like a dozen times by the time you're finished because of all the rereading you have to do in preparation for the chapter that you're working on. So anyway, uh, yeah, I don't have anything against Micah. I'm just ready for whatever's after Micah. On the bright side, this is probably going to be short. As you can see from your handout, there's only like 5 things to fill out. I don't have that many notes. And honestly, and you get this way in a lot of the minor prophets, is by the time you get to the end, a lot of what he's saying is stuff he's already said. And it's just a lot of sort of saying the same thing in a different way. And then at the end, he tacks on some positivity. Because very rarely do they ever leave things in a negative context. So it's going to be pretty short, which is good because I'm really tired. We passed out candy to like 1,000 kids last night, and that was tiring. So anyway, again, freezing to death while I was doing it too. That wasn't fun. Again, like I feel like I've said this for a lot of Micah. There's not a great place to break the chapter. There's clearly like 2 sections going on here. We just don't exactly know what actually is the end of section 1 and the beginning of section 2. People will break it at 6 and then have 7 through 20. People will break it at 7 like I did and then have 8 through 20. I think, some people will throw in maybe even like, I don't know. We know that there's sort of 2 different sections going on. We don't exactly know how they should be broken up. I just kind of put 1 through 7, because I think adding that extra verse 7 does present a nice contrast. So we're going to get into that now, and we're going to read starting in verse 1. Woe is me, for I am like those who gather summer fruits, like those who glean vintage grapes. There is no cluster to eat of the first ripe fruit which my soul desires. The faithful man has perished from the earth, and there is no one upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood. Every man hunts his brother with a net. That they may successfully do evil with both hands, the princes ask for gifts, the judge seeks a bribe, and the great man utters his evil desire. So they scheme together. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. The day of your watchmen and your punishment comes. Now shall be their perplexity. Do not trust in a friend, do not put your confidence in a companion. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your bosom. For son dishonors father, daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Man's enemies are the men of his own household. Therefore I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. So, like I said, I don't have a lot either in terms of on your sheet or even in my own notes. I'm just going to kind of go through the stuff I think is interesting, I guess, and relevant. So, first off, obviously, this is like a woe or a lament. Pretty obvious. We're starting out with woe is me. What's interesting is the use of first person, right? Chapter 6, it ended with God speaking, saying, you shall sow, but not reap. You shall tread the olives, but not anoint with oil, and make sweet wine, but not drink wine. Now, in chapter 7, it's I think that's later on in my notes. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Anyway, now we have the use of first person in chapter 7. The problem is we don't exactly know who's speaking. Whoever's words these are either speaking on behalf of all of Judah, or he's lamenting the disaster he himself specifically is befalling, you know, as Judah is sort of collapsing around him. In either case, the speaker laments that the faithful man has perished from the earth. So, right, the first thing I sort of I put on your sheet is list the ultimate reason for the lament. Sort of the biggest reason is sort of lamenting that there's no righteous people left, right? Sort of reminiscent of Abraham, right? You know, oh, if there's this many righteous people left, will you destroy the city? If there's this many, you know, and it gets down to like 10, and then, you know, God destroys the city anyway. But that's really neither here nor there, right? The ultimate reason for the lament is the faithful man has perished from the earth. So, right, maybe this is coming from Micah himself, which is what some people have suggested. Then Micah is the one sort of lamenting here. Just as in chapter 6, God said that Judah would sow but not reap. Now, this lamenter, whoever he is comparing himself to one who gleans vintage grapes, but there is no cluster to eat of the first ripe fruit, which his soul desires. That's what I was thinking of earlier when I got lost in my notes. Right, so the spiritual condition that Judah has reached, you know, it's reached the point where it seems as though there's no righteousness left. There's no righteous people left in Judah. And we see, again, like I said before I started reading, we see much of the same of what we've already read, right? Verse 2 of chapter 7, everybody lies in wait for blood. We've already sort of seen Micah call this out. In chapter 2, he calls out the people building up Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with iniquity. And that's verse 2 of verse 10 of chapter 2. The next verse of chapter 2, verse 11 says, her heads judge for a bribe, her priests teach for pay, and her prophets divine for money. And then in chapter 7, this lamenter describes the state of Judah as one in which the prince asks for gifts, the judge seats a bribe. So, right, I read specifically in chapter 2. We're also reading in chapter 7, which is one of the reasons why, again, this is probably going to be pretty short. All right, we've already read about the corrupt justice system that Micah is calling out. And what's interesting about chapter 7 is, you know, almost this state of paranoia that we start reading about once we hit verse 5. Right? Do not trust in a friend. Do not put your confidence in a companion. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your bosom. Right? Almost a sense of, you know, paranoia. I can't trust anyone. You know, no one is really on my side. Normal relationships have deteriorated to the point where there's no one that you can trust in. You can't trust in anyone. Even people who were once your friends, who you once could trust in. And it's apparently gotten so bad that, as he says, son dishonors father, daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies are the men of his own household. You know, that just sounds like a normal Monday to me, but, you know, I'm kidding. Right. Families have been torn apart, and they're turning on each other, perhaps turning on each other due to this, distrust of, don't trust in a friend, don't trust in a companion. And then maybe that's playing into the reason why the son is dishonoring the father, the daughter rising against the mother, so on and so forth. But for whatever reason, families are being torn apart and they're turning on each other. And the lamenter compares the state of the world around him with his own life, in a sense. And that's why I really wanted to throw verse 7 in here, even though some people think it belongs in the next section, is because it serves a nice contrast of, okay, all this is happening. People aren't trusting each other. Families are being torn apart, right? And really, I mean, if families are being torn apart at that point, society as a whole is collapsing, right? And I'm not going to make any modern day argument about, well, that's just like what we're going through or whatever. Because, I mean, maybe you can make the application, maybe you couldn't. it was a whole lot worse in Micah's time than whatever application you could make. I mean, we're definitely talking about familial violence. There's it's definitely a lot worse than anything that we could imagine. But he's comparing the state of the world around him to his own life, and he says, right, even though families are being torn apart, people aren't trusting each other, and society itself is essentially collapsing. Even all this is going on. What does he say? Therefore, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Right. So, right. The main reason for the lament, the ultimate reason is, right, he's lamenting the fact that it seems like there's no righteous people left. Additional reasons for the lament is 7:2. Everybody lies in wait for blood. 7:3, the prince asks for gifts, the judge seeks a bribe. So again, I mean, just sort of the same stuff that we've seen. Then you get into verse 5, and that's when you get into the paranoia stuff. Don't trust people, don't put your confidence in people. Verse 6 is where you get into the family stuff. Families are turning on each other, all this. So that's really all there is to there. And then I put New Testament reference, right? This section is quoted by Jesus in Matthew 10:21. Jesus says, now brother will deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. So this theme of family distrust, family violence, it's used by Jesus. And verses 25 and 26 of Matthew 10, Jesus even quotes directly from Micah chapter 7, verse 6. Well, I didn't. Okay. Let me just flip here. Micah 10, 25 and 26. I don't think I wrote that down right, because that doesn't make any sense. I don't know. Anyway, he quotes directly from Micah 7, verse 6, talking about the, son dishonoring father, daughter dishonoring mother, all of that. And what Jesus is getting at is he's presenting, because this is in the same section where it says, he who finds his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. That's in verse 39. So in this whole section in Matthew, Jesus is presenting losing one's life, which includes rejecting family bonds in favor of serving Jesus fully, right? Because I preached on before, anything that prevents you from fully serving Jesus, you have to get rid of. Not get rid of in the sense of you never talk to your family and go become a monk or something, but it can't come up above Jesus, obviously. Right. So he's presenting losing one's life, which includes rejecting family bonds in some cases, almost presenting it as a good thing, or at least as a necessary, wickedness, I guess. In order for the gospel to advance and for an individual to become a full disciple. So there's almost sort of a positive spin that Jesus puts on. And we don't often read it that way. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's a positive spin. Right after Jesus quotes about, from Micah about families turning on each other. In Micah, however, the type of violence and distrust, it's not presented as a necessary wickedness in order for God's message to advance. It's just sort of presented as wickedness, right? Woe is me, verse 1. In Micah's time, the wickedness is only presented in a negative context, and there's not really any redeeming quality about it, right? In fact, as I've argued, it's contrasted with, all of this is happening and that's bad and society's falling apart, but I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation, right? The only positive spin comes from, in spite of what is happening, not necessarily because of it. Whereas Jesus says, because of, families giving up other family members and all this stuff, the gospel goes forth and you can become a true disciple. So it's a little bit different. The lamenters lamenting the downfall of civilization, like we said, the family unit's been ruptured. Friendships can't exist without distrust. So ultimately, even before the physical destruction of Judah, Jerusalem, even before any of that had taken place, there was already the societal destruction of Judah, which had already occurred, right? At that point, is there even a Judah worth saving at that point? And I mean, I guess there wasn't. So that's verses 1 through 7. Verse 8 through 20. This is where we get into, as most minor prophets do, I said, sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, the sort of happy, feel-good, positive message at the end. So starting in verse 8, do not rejoice over me, my enemy. When I fall, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. I will bear the indignation of the Lord because I have sinned against him, until he pleads my case and executes justice for me. He will bring me forth to the light. I will see his righteousness. Then she who is my enemy will see, and shame will cover her who said to me, where is the Lord your God? My eyes will see her. Now she will be trampled down like mud in the streets. In the day when your walls are to be built, in that day the decree shall go forth far and wide. In that day they shall come to you from Assyria and the fortified cities, from the fortress to the river, from sea to sea, and to mountain to mountain. Yet the land shall be desolate because of those who dwell in it, and for the fruit of their deeds. Shepherd your young people with your staff, the flock of your heritage who dwell solitarily in a woodland in the midst of Carmel. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead, as in the days of old, as in the days when you came up out of the land of Egypt. I will show them wonders. The nations shall see and be ashamed of all their might. They shall put their hand over their mouth. Their ears shall be deaf. They shall lick the dust like a serpent. They shall crawl from the holes like snakes of the earth. They shall be afraid of the Lord our God, and shall fear because of you. Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity and passing over the transgression of the remnant of his heritage? He does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in mercy. He will again have compassion on us and will subdue our iniquities. You will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. You will give truth to Jacob and mercy to Abraham, from which you have sworn to our fathers from days of old. So, the last part of chapter 7, and the last part of Micah as a whole, it's interesting. And no one really knows entirely what this is talking about. Right. We have mention of a city, and we've had mentions of cities before, right? Samaria, I will make a heap of ruins in the field. Mention of Samaria, Jerusalem, we got building up Zion with bloodshed, building up Jerusalem with iniquity. So, in chapter 7, we have, verse 11, in the day when your walls are to be built, in that day the decree shall go far and wide. Is this talking about Jerusalem? People have argued that. Is this talking about Samaria? People have argued that. Is this even talking about an actual city at all? Yeah, we really don't know what this is talking about. Recognizing the range of scholasticism on this, I'm not going to try to argue what this is or isn't. Right? If the prophecy is localized, which all prophecy is localized, so it is, then we would think that this would be talking about Jerusalem. Although we have mention of, walls being built, we never have mention of walls being destroyed, as if it's already assumed that the walls are already destroyed, which has led some people to say, well, this is talking about Jerusalem, but only if this was added, later during the exile. In which case the lamenter wouldn't be Micah, but somebody else. There's that train of thought, and nothing necessarily jumps out to make us even think that that's necessary. Verses 1 through 6 and possibly 7 are set in the present time, with the lamenter, whoever he is, lamenting the present evil. And then verse 8, in the New King James, it says, when I fall, I will arise, and when I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. So if you're only reading this, you would think, this is referencing a future event. So if it's referencing a future event, then, this is talking about like the future rebuilding of Jerusalem's wall, after the fall of Jerusalem. But the verbs are actually, present. It's not necessarily when I fall and when I sit in darkness, but I sit and I fall, right? I fall, I will arise. I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me, right? So the lamenter is speaking in the present. If verse 8 is a city and not a person, or not like a metaphor, then the city falls and, the city sits in darkness, and all of this is contrasted in the day in which the walls are rebuilt. But we have the issue of which city, because again, Jerusalem is not mentioned by name here, which is odd because, he's mentioned Jerusalem. He's name dropped Jerusalem several times before. Why doesn't he just name drop it here if that's what he's in reference to? Perhaps there would be no need to mention the destruction of the walls if this had already occurred. He doesn't name drop Jerusalem, but he does name drop 3 places, right? Carmel, Bashan, and Gilead. And all these 3 places are associated, not with Judah, but of the northern kingdom of Israel, which is why some people think that this is actually talking about Samaria. If this is talking about Samaria, then, right, maybe this was given in Micah's time. But when it comes to the rebuilding of walls, we often associate this with Jerusalem. We don't necessarily associate this with Samaria, right? We have entire books of the Bible, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, associated with rebuilding the Jerusalem walls. So, when it comes to this, there's difficulties surrounding whichever city we try to interpret this to be. If you associate this with Jerusalem, why doesn't he say Jerusalem? Why is it assumed that, walls will be rebuilt if walls haven't even been destroyed yet? Unless you want to place this in the exilic period, in which I guess you could do that, but then you would have to give an argument as to why you're actually doing that. If you associate this with Samaria, you have the arguments because, you have other northern kingdom cities, but then, what walls are we even talking about at this point? So, there's problems with whichever city you want this to be. But the phrase in verse 10, your God, verse 10, where is the Lord your God, right? The way that that's written in Hebrew, right? The feminine singular, I think, is, often, maybe almost always associated with Jerusalem. So that's a point in favor of Jerusalem. Verse 11 is the same thing with the your walls, right? The feminine singular. So people say, well, this has to be about Jerusalem and the Jerusalem walls. So if this is Jerusalem, despite the places listed in verse 14, how is this relevant? Assuming that this was written in Micah's time, or, given in Micah's time, and assuming that this is about Jerusalem, how is this relevant to an audience that has not even witnessed the destruction of those walls, let alone would be worrying about the rebuilding of these walls, or, anything like that? right? What is the relevance or the significance, as I wrote on your handout, for the original audience, right? I mean, it's kind of you know, someone came today and said, well, you know, we're gonna rebuild First Baptist Talala after that fire, and you're just like, what fire? What are you talking about? Are you like gonna light our church on fire or something? It's like you're putting the what's gonna happen after the destruction before the destruction itself, which is just it's really awkward. Ultimately, like I said, we don't really know what this is talking about. What city, even really who's saying this. But we do know what the original audience can glean from this, right? And we only find that really in verses 14 through 20, and then really like when we get to verse 18. So, 14, the lamenters praying and asking God to be a shepherd and to feed his people, as in the days of old. He's asking for wonders which will put the nations to shame. And like I said, regardless of who's speaking or whatever city this person has in mind, if he's even speaking of an actual city at all, ultimately, the relevance of the significance is found in 18 with the words, "Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity and passing over the transgression of the remnant of his heritage." Right? He does not retain his anger forever because he delights in mercy. He will again have compassion on us and will subdue our iniquities. You will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. You will give mercy to Abraham, which you have sworn to our fathers from the days of old. So that's the takeaway for anyone. People in Micah's day, people in the exile, people, us today. Though this present reality is suffering, which is, that's the thesis statement for Micah, is the present reality is suffering. Right? Though the present reality is suffering, right? Everyone wants to kill each other. No one can trust each other. The family unit and society as a whole is like collapsing. Even maybe the physical city itself is destroyed, because you have some sort of like rebuilding mentioned in the last half of this, all of this terrible stuff that's going on in the present, right? For the remnant of his heritage, the future is the forgiveness of the sins that caused all of this, right? The sins that caused all of the, destruction of the city, and then obviously, killing people and not, turning on your family is a sin in and of itself. So, the future for the remnant is the forgiveness of sins. Micah, or whoever's speaking here, he ends on a positive note. And the very last verse of Micah says, "You will give truth to Jacob and mercy to Abraham, which you have sworn to our fathers from days of old." John 1:17 says that for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So, this is sort of your application for the evening, which is also the last question on your thing. What better reality do Christians cling to? What better reality than the original hearers? Do we as Christians cling to? And the answer is, we have pardoning of iniquity through the death of Jesus Christ, right? We don't have, forgiveness of sins and the pardoning of iniquity in the sense that they do, right? Because we have a Savior who died and rose again, and now is, because he was tempted in every way as a man, he is advocating for us and praying for us, to the Father on our behalf, right? We have a better reality than a better present reality that we're living in now than the future reality that the people in Micah's time could only hope for, right? And we see a lot of this application that I've made because it's there in the book of Micah, right? The fulfillment of the promises given to Abraham and Jacob that the recipients of Micah 7 were clinging to is ultimately found in Jesus Christ, right? Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity, passing over the transgression of the remnant of his heritage, right? We're not hoping, in a time of future forgiveness, Micah 7. But we're clinging to a forgiveness which has already been given through Jesus' death and resurrection. And so our present reality is even better than the future reality that can only be hoped for the hearers of Micah chapter 7. So anyway, are there any questions or comments? That's pretty much all I got. Like I said, I didn't have a lot to draw out tonight, but next week we get to do background information, so I'm sure I'll run it an hour. All right. Well, yeah, I get to be your prayer man today because Lester is at a funeral visitation. I found these on Lester's office when I was looking for a stapler earlier, and they are prayer lists. I don't know if these are accurate or not. Some of the things on here are from at least a month ago, so it's probably not the latest prayer sheet, but it'll work for now, I guess. Do what?
I'd be careful if I found it in Lester's office. I know how old it is.
Oh. Yeah, I saw. I was looking there, looking for a stapler, and I found a bulletin from like 2012. Anyway, okay. The first, I'm just gonna go in sort of the list that he has it. So, jail ministry, is good. We, every week we met with the same two pods, and there's other pods obviously, and in a way I wish we could hit those, but it's good for the guys in those pods, and they have consistency now, and they're actually bringing questions and saying, hey, we were talking about this in our Bible study, what does this mean, or what do you think of this? So I think it's good for them, where they know that they have a place every week they can come and bring questions about the Bible. And that's good. And apparently now we also have clearance to go in at night. So I guess next week maybe we will start doing that. Excuse me. So jail ministries doing pretty good. Unspokens, yeah. Here's the thing about unspokens. Everyone has an unspoken prayer. Right. Yeah. Everyone has requests that they don't want to mention out loud, but we do want to remember the unspoken prayers. Okay. Yeah. Some of these are like. Let's see. Okay. We have Bob Thiel's family for salvation. We obviously want to keep praying for them. Let's see, Larry Bennett with ALS. Nicholas O'Connor, which is somebody will.
My grandson.
Okay, your grandson. Okay, I just had Wilma written beside it, and I was like, it's some Ken or something to Wilma, but okay. Let's see, Al Casto, Alan Roberts. He actually, this tells you how old this is. Yeah, he passed away, 2 weeks ago probably, and they just had his funeral the other week. And I think some of the families taking it worse than others. So keep the family in your prayers for sure. Okay, I got another one that has Wilma's name written beside it. David Matheson.
Oh yeah, he's a young man. He's a bull rider, but he's got terminal cancer.
Ooh, all right. Pray for him for sure. Terminal cancer. The Lane family. Yeah, they're next week, right? Monday.
They're going to do a cesarean on him.
And no, before then.
Yeah, have it by labor before then. They're going to do a cesarean Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock.
All right.
At the St. John's Hospital in Bartlesville.
Okay. The military, keep them in our prayers. RJ Kitterman, which is Judy's son-in-law.
Son-in-law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Battling cancer. Kendall Lay. Bill Davis. Greg Killian.
That's Joe's nephew.
Yes. Okay.
And Joe's got that procedure on his eye, the 8th, scheduled for November 8th.
How often are they doing those, his eye procedures?
Well, that's the first one. I don't know.
Okay. Because he said there was like several, right?
I don't know.
Oh.
I think he's gonna. I understood he was gonna have a procedure this time, and then in a few months he would have it on his other eye. The same procedure.
Oh, his other eye.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's some kind of a procedure to relieve the pressure on the eyeball itself. That's what I understand.
Okay. So yeah, there's a stack, and I'm gonna look at this one and see if there's any other ones that I
I'm
missed.
sure Denise from Wheaties in there somewhere. Yeah.
She wasn't on the first one.
Well, she needs to be. She's
So-
taking chemo.
Yes, Denise Crumwitty.
That's Christy's mother.
Yes. See, I feel like these are just getting like older. Yeah, they probably are. Okay.
You need to remember from my family, the loss of the Kara daughter Kara.
Yeah, that whole family, you know, everything that's gone on.
And Kevin and his family too. He lost his grandfather. And I understand he might have a lot of responsibility taking care of the grandmother.
Kevin's family. All right, who else?
Remember Kathy? They are trying to get approval from the Indian Health Service for some different kinds of injections for her eyes. She lost all the ground she gained. That's terrible. It's funny. It just happened just all of a sudden, wasn't it? Yeah. They still don't know for sure. It's something like macular degeneration, but it's not exactly that. So I don't know. I hope the Indian doesn't drag their feet too long. It's a process. You know it. They don't move very fast.
So that 5th grader in the school's got that leukemia crab.
Oh,
Jax.
Jack.
Jack.
Jax. J-A-X is
Yeah.
what I understand his
Jax.
first name is. Jackson.
Okay.
Is it? Or just Jax?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Leukemia.
He was at St. Jude's. I don't know if he still is or not.
It's not even on the. Yeah, this just tells you how old this list is. It's not even on here. So. Anyone else?
Wilbur's brother, Jerry Stafford. Oh, yeah. I can't remember his own brother. He's in rehab now, right? Yeah, I went to visit him day before yesterday. And he's staying at a really nice place. The last rehab he was in, he had 10 people in one room. And they just did their thing. But he has his own private room and bathroom, and they're serving him wonderful food. It's just been a really good thing.
Yeah.
And they're working on him 3 times a day instead of once a day.
That's good. That's
Yes,
good.
it is. He needs that. But his leg he can't put any weight on it yet because it's so swollen. It's really, really swollen. They've got elastic bandages all over him from the groin area down, and it's pretty well swollen. So he says it hurts. Probably. I was pleased to get to go see him. I rode in with my other brother and his wife is younger than he is, so she can still drive in Tulsa. And he and I don't drive in Tulsa.
We need to keep Israel and all that situation in our prayers.
Yeah. A lot of civilians, unfortunately.
Yeah, that granddaughter of mine that's in Saudi Arabia, and this can't be just talked about everywhere, but they're saying that
Do you want to not say it on Facebook then?
probably not. It's kind of a private thing.
We're off.